Color calibration and color checker cards is something that a lot of people seem to get worried about or confused about. And actually, there's not a great deal to worry about. Let's take a look at a couple of things here. So one of the sort of industry standards is this little one, which is the x-rite color checker passport. Comes in a little folded hard case, great for taking around with you, stopping it getting damaged. It has the standard x-rite color palette, and as well as that, it also has a couple of grey cards at a larger scale. Benefits to product photographers is you can stand it up like that, you can stand it up like that, etc., if you're putting it in your product photographs. The key benefit for it though, which I love, is the design of it going into its own hard case, because one of the big problems with color cards is that over time they can fade. You can also get fingerprints on them, dust on them, and as soon as you do that, they're kind of ruined anyway. They're not going to do their job properly. So the very fact that this one is stored in its own self-contained container is fantastic. So that's the x-rite color checker passport. They do a mini color checker, which is just the main swatch as the same as the one that's in there that you can see there. But that one only comes in a sleeve, so you need to be a lot more careful with it, but it's a lot less expensive and it has all the essential color swatches on it that you need. Simplified versions would be cue card like this, which is just literally a grayscale card, grey swatch card. Other larger ones, which are often used in video, the Gretag Macbeth color checker here is essentially the same as that. This is quite an old one. I wouldn't trust this one anymore because I've had this for 10 years or so and it's probably faded a bit. That one comes in its own envelope. And then back in the days as well, we also used to use these Kodak grey cards, which are perfectly neutral grey, 18% reflectivity, just a large swatch of grey, neutral grey. Now, what are these things actually for? Oops, what are these things actually for, and how do you use them? Well, you'll find a lot of information out there and some misinformation about how you can put these into your photograph them, record the swatch, then calibrate your camera to match the swatch and have perfect color and all of this nonsense. And I'm afraid, in my opinion, 30 years of photography, it is mostly nonsense, because recalibrating your camera every time with every setup to match the color checker swatch is a little bit elaborate, a little bit too far. Because, for example, shooting with the Hasselblad, which has an excellent natural color system, I don't really want to mess around with that. The only time I think it's absolutely necessary to recalibrate the scene to the swatches is if you're doing very specific artwork reproduction or photographing paintings. So for example, I photographed paintings, Victor Hugo's paintings, for the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. And in those instances where you need to make sure that you've got perfect homogeneous illumination over the painting, then it's well worth holding having the color checker card in each corner of the painting and in the center, and doing a reference so that you can essentially make sure that the colors of the painting are absolutely accurate. But the reason that could be useful for paintings is because you're just dealing with a flat field, a flat surface. When you deal with photographing people or models or products, you usually 9 times out of 10 have more than one light. So you may have a light from here, but you'll have a light from here and from here. And every light that you have will have a slightly different color tinge. So holding this here and expecting to get it perfect for everything is impossible, because if you slightly varied it and add it at a slight angle, you'd be picking up light from a different one or light from a different one. So it seems completely over the top to want to calibrate beyond the actual camera manufacturer's profiles for the sake of your mixed lighting setup that's going to change every time. Different modifiers will give a different color tint, different studios you're working in may have different reflectivity off nearby objects, etc., etc. If you think about it, what makes the most sense? Is it best to leave your camera calibrated by the manufacturers, people like Hasselblad with amazing color science departments, or Nikon and Canon, Pentax, etc.? These people have specified and calibrated the sensor in your camera to scientific standards to the best of their ability. And I don't really see the point in messing around with that. The second part of that is what most photographers do with their work afterwards. What happens with nearly all advertising images, most fashion images, is that we retouch them. We retouch them, we resaturate certain areas of the clothing or the product. You think of any advertising image, whether it's a pair of, Adidas football boots or a new cologne or perfume, the colors are never really what they look like on the actual real product because they've been enhanced or the contrast has been changed. So what would have been the point of doing the whole perfect calibration when you're only going to mess around with the color in the final post-production stages anyway? However, we will show you in this video some of the methods for using the x-rite color software that you can download from x-rite, which is the calibration software, which you can take into Lightroom if you wish to do the calibration. You can do it within the focus software, and you can also do this within Capture One. They're quite a convoluted process, and as I say, I think in many cases completely unnecessary, apart from photographing flat field paintings, artwork for archival or documentation reasons. Now, however, why do I have all these color cards in front of me? Well, the main reason is actually for the gray card elements, from the white through to the black and the various stages and steps of gray. But I could just as easily use one of these or the Kodak gray card that I showed you as well. That's the only part that I'm actually interested in. And the reason I'm interested in that is because that will at least tell me what is neutral, and it gives me the ability to neutralize the image to make sure there is no color cast. Now, we're doing a very complicated shoot here at the moment, which has multiple lights from multiple directions, backlighting coming in here with a large Fresnel fluter, two little Pico projection attachments illuminating the logos, a reflector reflecting the Fresnel light back onto this side, a softbox above coming through the scrim. Every one of those lights will have its own color biased. Even the scrim material, even the softbox material will create a slightly warmer shot. The fluter, which is a Fresnel lens, may be more neutral. The Pico lights may be slightly warmer. Who knows? It's impossible to tell unless we actually looked at every light and measured them. But when we're using multiple light sources, there is going to be a variation in color. Even if you use a silver umbrella compared to a beauty dish, there is a slight variation in color. And there's definitely a variation in color when you're using a softbox compared to using a para. And in many lighting situations, you have a para and you may have a softbox at the back. So this is the difficulty of it. However, what we do want to do is to try and avoid any sort of unnatural color cast to the image that might bias the color of the product in the wrong direction. This is especially useful for color temperature, because one of the things that we are aware of with auto white balance and the Kelvin color temperature scale is color temperature, where we can have full spectrum light at 2800K or 3600K or 5500K or up to 9000K. It has the full spectrum there, but the color may be bluer or warmer. And using the gray card elements of your color checker will help you neutralize any color cast that's from the difference in lighting variations or lighting impurities, and also assist you with your color temperature. Now, how do we use it? Well, let's take a look. In this instance, I've got a very tricky one because I've got a very interesting metallic red on this particular subject. I've got lots of neutral tones anyway in the chrome and the metalwork, but essentially I want to decide which is the most important face, because I could do it here, which means that I'm really taking most of the light from the softbox coming through the scrim, so it might be worth taking a shot at that point, like so. But this is probably the most important side of my image in here, because this is the side where the light, the predominant light on the product is. Now you can see even in there, you can see where my pico light has hit one particular color patch. So that's really not that useful to me. So I'm just going to move that out there a little bit instead. And as I said, even the angle that I position it at can drastically change things. Now, if we take those shots, for example, we can now see the color checker card in that position, and well, actually it's even too glary in that position because the glare there, the light is glaring off from the fluter that is creating the backlighting look on my fishing reel shot. But if we take this image, for example, we can go into this tool down here, which is the neutralize tool. And what that will let me do is click on that and it will neutralize to that tone. But if we look at the bottom right hand corner, we can actually see the RGB values down here already where I'm currently positioned. And we can see RGB 68, 69 and 68. So the image is almost perfectly neutral already. It is one tinge greener than it should be. One measurement, one value greener, because it's 68, 69, 68. Now if I click that tool there, now it will neutralize, and now everything is 69, 69, 69. That means we have a totally neutral balanced color. So this is basically the most useful part of the color checker tool, because now I can continue shooting knowing that the light has been neutralized. However, the problem occurs in that any change in lighting, you see now, look, this is interesting. I should be able to neutralize in here as well. And we look at the difference in here. It's much, much more different in this position of the light, because here we have measurements of 88, 93 and 92. So even that slight position difference in the color checker card, it's either picking up more of the light from one lighting direction or one modifier, or it's picking up more light from one reflector that I've got in there than another. And this is where it gets complicated. So there I've neutralized that now. They're all 93, 93 now. And if I continue from that point, let's just look at the next one. That's the one that we neutralized before. If I continue shooting from that point, every shot that I take thereafter will maintain that neutrality that I've just set with the color neutral sampling tool. However, that's a good way of working, but if you decide to change your lighting setup, like you need to bring in a new modifier, maybe I'm going to bring in a pico box, and a pico box may all of a sudden become the key light. If you do that, then really you should put this in again, because the pico box may have a very minor color difference to the other modifiers. The other thing that has a big influencing factor on what you're shooting can even be your own clothes. You could be in close to your product, light will bounce off of you back onto the subject. It could be a nearby object or wall, or it can be an object next to another object in the same shot, and the reflectivity off of different objects onto themselves or onto the other object can also have a bearing on the outcome. So any change in setup can require you to put the color checker card back in again, just to keep things neutral. But to be honest, I'm a little bit lazy with it. I often put it in for the first shot, and sometimes I forget to continue with it in there. But as I said, many photographers are going to be changing the images and doing post work, etc., etc. So this worry that a lot of photographers have about using color checker cards and calibrating every scene to match the swatches, I think is certainly over the top and unnecessary. The only time, as I said, where I feel it's absolutely necessary to do a complete color profile that uses the color swatch as its reference for that profile to create your own calibration is where you're photographing flat field stuff such as artwork and paintings, and you have a set lighting setup and illumination for it. And it's interesting as well because photographers will go, yes, and that's great because then I've got it repeatable for that same lighting setup. But remember that even over time, lights can change color slightly as well. The light source might age, or the flash tube may be on its way out, or you may have changed the front diffuser or some other element that would affect it and cause things to need to be recalibrated. So I think there's far too much worry about this than is necessary, but certainly the grey card part of the shot is important. Let's just do one more in here with this particular grey card and take a look at what we get with this one. And I'll go in and I'll look at the value on this one. And it's showing me 62, 61, 61, 75, 74, 74. So again, probably it's exactly accurate with that particular grey there. It's just simply I've got it slightly tilted at a different angle to the previous shot. So it's that slight variation in angle, whether it's picking up more of that light over there, or more of these lights, that are going to cause those minor differences. But as you can see, they're only minor differences, imperceivable to the human eye, the difference between 75, 74, 74 and 74, 74, 74. You wouldn't even really notice it. So this is just one stage as well in the color reproduction process. When you move from here, from then taking the digital file for printing in magazines and brochures, there's another stage of the color process that is also going to cause minor shifts as well. So don't over worry about these color calibration tools. Just concentrate on really using the grey card elements for neutralizing, and as we'll show you as well in Lightroom and some of the other software, you can measure these grey card values to ensure that you have got a neutral tone. So let's move over from Focus software into Lightroom software. Here's the same image in Lightroom, and if you look at this tool here and you move the tool over, you can see the percentages of the RGB values. In Lightroom, it doesn't show the RGB values from 0 to 255, which is odd because it shows them in that way in Photoshop, but in Lightroom it's showing them as a percentage. And we can see here that they're all pretty much bang on accurate anyway, but if I click, that will then neutralize that grey square as it has there. Values 23.7, 23.7, 23.7. So we now had our neutral target there, and you can do it that way in Lightroom as well. We will take a look at now on the process for calibrating using the swatch chart and show you how that's done in Focus, and it's a very similar process for some of the other software too. Okay, so the final part that I want to show you is the reproduction mode and the color calibration settings that can now be applied with Focus. This is particularly useful if you are working under very precise or specific conditions where you may be recording historical documents or artwork or paintings in a museum format or an institute, and you want to control the colors very, very precisely and accurately. Now, obviously, the Hasselblad system is already set to record very accurate colors, but it is primarily focused on recording accurate colors for portraiture, people, product photography, studio photographers, landscapes. If you want a greater degree of control for things like archival purposes, then this is where the reproduction panel and the camera color configuration can be useful. So over here we see reproduction mode. I'm just going to go to a color swatch chart here that I photographed. Now I photographed this color swatch chart under the HMI lights that we are using at the moment, which is a daylight balanced continuous light source. And the first thing I need to do is to neutralize it. So I take my neutralize tool here, click neutralize, and that's neutralized the gray, as you can see. And if we actually take our color values, we can see, look at that, they should all be nice and neutral, which they are. Turn that off again. Now we basically want to create our own profile. And the first thing I'm going to do is just check the box reproduction mode. You can see how that adjusts the image there to a much more flatter looking image. It's very similar to sort of a log file in video format. And we've now got the option here in color calibration to go into edit and choose to create our own calibrated profile. So we'll target color checker on here. I'm going to say auto locate. And you can see that those red control area has automatically selected the color checker. I say calibrate, and it has now calibrated it based on the information on the color checker. That's one of these, that is actually this color checker. So if you're a professional photographer in a studio environment or working in an archival environment, you'll be familiar with these type of things. So these are a sort of test plate, if you like, for knowing exactly what the colors should be. So we've said calibrate. I can now name the calibration. It's named it by default at a specific date and time. And I say create, and it's done that. I say done, and that is my calibration produced. And now I can now set my color calibration to that particular profile. And that's it. So now every picture that I take going forwards using that profile has been calibrated for this particular color chart under this particular lighting source. And then if you were going to shoot another series of images under a different lighting source or a different set of circumstances, again, you would introduce your color checker card or your color checker chart, photograph it under those circumstances, and run through this calibration process to suit.
For Lightroom, you'll need to go to the x-rite website and download the necessary color checker calibration software. Then, when you're in Lightroom, import the raw file image that you've taken of your color checker passport under the lighting conditions that you intend to use. Go to File, Export with Preset, Color Checker Camera Calibration, create a profile with a relevant name. It will process the file. When that process is complete, you will need to restart Lightroom. Navigate your way to the profile selector, choose Browse, and then select the profile that you created under Profiles.